She took her twin sister's place as the maid to face the cruel fiancé. No one expected what happened next. What you're about to see is unforgettable. Two sisters. One secret. And a bride who never should have said yes. When a maid vanishes for 2 weeks and her identical twin quietly takes her place inside a billionaire's mansion, everyone thinks the swap is harmless, just a favor between sisters. But some secrets don't stay buried. By the time the truth comes out, an engagement will shatter, a family will be exposed, and one woman will finally get the life she was always meant to have. Stay with me until the end, because the moment the cruel fiancé looks into the maid's eyes and says 4 quiet words, everything changes forever. Hey everyone, welcome back. Before we get into tonight's story, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city and your country in the comments. I read every single one of them. Tonight's story is about 2 twin sisters, a mansion full of secrets, and a woman who thought money could buy anything, including love. It's emotional. It's got some moments that might make you tear up. And I promise, the ending is one you will not see coming. Get comfortable, because once this starts, you won't want to look away. Some sisters share a face. These 2 shared a life they never asked to live. Hannah Carter was 32 years old, and most mornings she woke up before the sun did. She worked as a live-in housekeeper for the Whitfield family, one of the wealthiest names in Charleston, South Carolina, and she had held that job for almost 4 years. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy. But it paid enough to keep the lights on in her mother's small house on the edge of town, and it paid enough, barely, to keep her mother's heart medication filled every month. Linda Carter's heart had been failing slowly for 2 years. The doctors said surgery could fix it, but surgery cost more money than Hannah made in 2 years combined. So Hannah folded towels, scrubbed floors, and pressed shirts for a family that barely knew her middle name, and she told herself it was enough, because it had to be. The Whitfield estate sat behind iron gates on the edge of the Ashley River, a house so big that Hannah sometimes went entire days without seeing another living soul in it. Nathaniel Whitfield, the only son of the family and heir to the Whitfield hotel empire, was 34, kind to the staff in a distracted sort of way, and engaged to a woman named Victoria Sterling. Victoria was 32, beautiful in the practiced way of someone who had spent a lifetime being looked at, and cruel in a way she never showed anyone but the people who couldn't afford to complain. She called Hannah the help instead of her name. She left messes on purpose to watch Hannah clean them. Once, she threw a glass of wine on a rug just to see how fast Hannah would drop to her knees to save the floor. Hannah never said a word. She needed the job too much to have pride. Then, 11 days before the Whitfield family's engagement gala, Hannah slipped on a wet marble step carrying a laundry basket and broke her ankle in 2 places. She sat in the emergency room with tears streaming down her face, not from the pain, but from the panic. 2 weeks off work meant 2 weeks without pay. 2 weeks without pay meant her mother's medication might not get filled. And worse, missing the biggest event of the Whitfield social calendar without notice could cost her the job entirely. Mrs. Whitfield had made it clear more than once that reliability was the only thing that mattered to her. That night, sitting on her mother's worn-out couch with her foot propped up and her mind spinning, Hannah's phone buzzed with a message she hadn't expected in 3 years. "I heard about the accident. I'm coming home." It was from Hope. Hope Carter was Hannah's identical twin, down to the small mole behind her left ear that only their mother could ever tell apart. But the 2 of them had grown up in completely different directions. Hope had left Charleston at 25 after a relationship, and a career, fell apart in Atlanta in the space of a single terrible month. She hadn't come back since. The sisters spoke maybe twice a year. There was history between them, quiet and painful, that neither one liked to touch. But blood is blood, and when Hope walked through their mother's front door 2 days later, she took one look at Hannah's foot in a boot and her mother's pale, tired face, and she understood everything without being told. "You can't lose this job," Hope said quietly. "I know," Hannah whispered. "Then let me do it. Let me be you. For 2 weeks. Nobody will know." Hannah stared at her sister, the same eyes, the same face, 5 years and 100 hard lessons apart, and for a long moment she didn't answer. Because taking Hope's help meant admitting how bad things had gotten. And sending Hope, of all people, into a house owned by wealthy, powerful people who never asked questions about the help. Felt like sending her sister somewhere Hannah didn't fully understand herself. "You don't know these people," Hannah finally said. "The bride-to-be, she's not kind, Hope. She's the kind of woman who—" "I've survived worse," Hope cut in, and something in her voice made Hannah go quiet. 2 weeks. That's all it is. I put on your apron, I answer to Hannah. I keep this family's world running, and nobody looks twice at a maid. Nobody ever does. 3 nights later, under a soft grey Charleston sky, Hope Carter walked up the long gravel drive of the Whitfield estate wearing her sister's uniform, her sister's name tag, and her sister's quiet, practiced smile. She had no idea that the woman waiting for her inside, cold, glittering, and about to become the lady of that house, was about to become the reason everything in both twins' lives was about to change forever. She thought she was just filling in for 2 weeks. She had no idea she was walking straight into her own past. The first morning was the hardest. Hope had never worked as household staff a day in her life. In her old career, she had been the one giving orders to housekeeping staff at a luxury hotel, not the one receiving them. But necessity is a fast teacher, and Ruth, the Whitfield estate's head housekeeper for almost 20 years, took one look at Hannah's clumsy hands with the silver polish and simply said, "Follow me, dear. I'll show you again." Ruth never suspected a thing. Grief and injury change a person's hands, she assumed. She had no reason to imagine there were 2 women wearing one name. By mid-morning, Hope had learned the rhythm of the house, which hallway creaked, which vase was 200 years old and not to be touched without gloves, which of the Whitfield family actually said good morning to the staff and which pretended they didn't exist. Nathaniel Whitfield fell into the first category. He was tall, a little tired-looking around the eyes, the kind of wealthy man who seemed almost embarrassed by his own house. When Hope passed him in the hallway that first day, he nodded and said, "Morning, Hannah. Feeling any better?" Clearly having heard about the ankle, and Hope had to catch herself before answering with anything other than a polite, practiced, "Better, thank you, sir." Victoria Sterling fell into the second category, except worse. Hope met her properly for the first time at 11 that morning, when Victoria swept into the kitchen in a silk robe, phone pressed to her ear, and pointed at a tray of pastries without looking at Hope even once. "That's cold. Redo it. And don't let it happen again," she said, before turning and walking out mid-sentence of her phone call. Hope stood there for a moment, tray in her hands, feeling something old and unpleasant rise up in her chest. She told herself it was nothing. Rich, unkind women were not a rare species. She had survived one already. But something about Victoria's voice nagged at her all afternoon. Something in the tilt of her chin, the exact cruelty of her tone. Hope told herself it was déjà vu, nothing more, and kept working. The days that followed fell into a strange rhythm. Hope learned to polish silver until her fingers ached, to press the family's clothes until they held a crease sharp enough to cut paper, to disappear into hallways the moment she heard Victoria's heels click against the marble. She learned, too, that Nathaniel Whitfield was lonelier than his fortune suggested. She caught him more than once standing alone on the back terrace at night, staring out at the river instead of joining the party inside. One evening, carrying a tray of tea to the study, Hope overheard him on the phone with someone, his voice low and strained. "I know what Dad wants. I know what the company needs. That doesn't mean I have to be happy about it," he was saying. "Victoria checks every box on paper. That's not the same as," he stopped himself, sighed, and hung up. Hope stood frozen in the hallway a moment longer than she should have, tea tray in hand, feeling an unexpected pang of sympathy for a man she barely knew. It was 3 days later, while dusting the family's private study, a room Victoria had specifically ordered be spotless for a visiting business associate, that Hope's whole world tilted sideways. A framed photograph sat on the side table, one she hadn't noticed before, Victoria at a hotel gala in Atlanta, younger, hair different, standing beside a man Hope hadn't seen in 5 years. Daniel. Hope's hands went cold around the feather duster. She picked up the photo, staring at it as if it might rearrange itself into something less impossible. Because 5 years ago, in Atlanta, a woman with a different last name, a woman who went by Vicky back then, had smiled her way into Hope's engagement, into Hope's job, into Hope's entire life, and had walked away with everything Hope had built, leaving her with nothing but a ruined reputation and a broken heart. That woman was standing in this photograph. And she was about to marry the son of the family Hope was currently working for in secret. Hope set the photo down very carefully, her heart pounding so loud she was sure someone in the hallway could hear it. Victoria Sterling and Vicky from Atlanta were the same woman. She came here to save her sister's job. She never expected to come face to face with the woman who destroyed her life. Hope didn't sleep that night. She lay on the narrow bed in the small staff quarters above the garage, staring at the ceiling, replaying 5 years of memory she had worked very hard to bury. She had been 27, an events manager at a boutique hotel in Atlanta, engaged to Daniel Reyes, a rising executive at the same company. She had been happy, genuinely, foolishly happy, right up until the week a new marketing consultant named Vicky arrived to help reposition the brand. Vicky was charming, ambitious, and endlessly kind to Daniel in a way that felt harmless until it didn't. Within 2 months, Hope had been accused of mishandling a client deposit, money that later turned out to have been quietly moved by someone with far more access than Hope ever had. She was fired within a week, her name quietly blacklisted across half the Atlanta hospitality industry before she even understood what had happened. Daniel, rather than standing by her, had already moved on. She found out he was seeing Vicky 3 weeks after the wedding invitations should have gone out. Hope had left Atlanta with 2 suitcases and a broken engagement and never looked back. She built a smaller, quieter life somewhere else, one she rarely spoke about, and told herself the woman who ruined her life was simply gone, erased, a bad memory with no name worth remembering. Except she wasn't gone. She was 2 floors below Hope right now, sleeping in a canopy bed in a mansion, engaged to a different, wealthier man, and treating Hope's twin sister like something beneath her notice. By morning, Hope had made a decision. She would not blow up her sister's job over an old wound. She would not let 5-year-old anger cost Hannah the paycheck their mother's medication depended on. She would finish the 2 weeks, collect the pay, and disappear the same way she'd disappeared from Atlanta. But fate, it turned out, had other plans. That afternoon, while polishing glassware in the pantry just off the main hallway, Hope heard Victoria's voice through the slightly open door of the adjoining sitting room. Victoria was on the phone, her tone sharp and businesslike in a way Hope had never heard her use with the staff. "The prenup language needs to be looser than what Robert's lawyers drafted," Victoria was saying. "I'm not signing anything that locks me out of the hotel shares if this doesn't work out. No, Nathaniel doesn't need to see this draft. Just have it ready before the wedding, quietly." There was a pause, then a short, cold laugh. "Love has nothing to do with it, and you know that better than anyone. I learned a long time ago that being liked gets you nowhere. Being necessary gets you everything." Another pause. "The last woman who tried to stand in my way lost her job, her fiancé, and her whole life in under 2 months. I don't lose." Hope's hands trembled around the glass she was holding. She wasn't imagining it. Victoria wasn't just cold and demanding, she was calculating, deliberately maneuvering herself into control of the Whitfield fortune before she'd even said her vows, and she had all but confirmed, in her own words, what she'd done to Hope 5 years ago and clearly wasn't finished doing to other people. The realization landed like a physical blow. This wasn't just an old wound reopening. This was happening again, to a new family, to a good man who had no idea what he was about to marry into. Hope set the glass down slowly, careful not to make a sound, her mind racing. She had come to this house to protect her sister's paycheck. Now she understood she might be the only person standing between the Whitfield family and a woman who had already proven, once, exactly what she was capable of. The question was no longer whether to stay quiet. The question was what Hope was willing to risk to make sure Victoria didn't win this time. She had every reason to walk away. Instead, she chose to stay and fight a battle that wasn't even hers. Hope told no one what she'd heard, not yet. Not Ruth, not her sister, and especially not Nathaniel. She needed proof, not suspicion, before she risked exposing herself, her sister's job, and whatever fragile piece was left in that house. So she watched. Quietly, carefully, the way she used to watch spreadsheets for numbers that didn't add up back when she managed events for a living. She noticed the way Victoria kept a second phone in a hidden drawer of her vanity. She noticed how Victoria's assistant, a nervous young woman named Priya, flinched every time Victoria raised her voice, as though she'd learned the hard way not to push back. And she noticed, almost against her will, how different Nathaniel was when Victoria wasn't in the room. 3 nights later, a summer storm rolled in off the river, cutting the power to the east wing of the house. Hope was sent to deliver candles to the study, where she found Nathaniel sitting alone at his desk, staring at a stack of paperwork he clearly wasn't reading. "Thank you," he said, taking the candle from her, and then, unexpectedly, "Can I ask you something, Hannah?" Hope's chest tightened at the wrong name, but she nodded. "Do you think people can change what they want out of life? Or are some people always just going to want the version of it that looks good on paper?" It wasn't the kind of question a man usually asked his fiancée's household staff. But there was something raw in his voice, something lonely, and Hope found herself answering honestly instead of politely. "I think," she said slowly, "some people spend so long chasing what looks impressive that they forget to ask if it actually makes them happy. And I think the people who really love you don't need convincing. They just show up. Consistently. Even when it's inconvenient." Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes, as though he was seeing her, really seeing her, for the first time in 4 years of walking past his own household staff without a second glance. "That's a very wise thing for a housekeeper to say," he said quietly. "I contain multitudes," Hope said before she could stop herself, and to her surprise, he laughed, a real laugh, warm and a little startled, the kind of laugh that made him look 10 years younger. It was a small moment. It shouldn't have mattered. But Hope walked out of that study with her heart beating strangely, and she scolded herself the entire way back to the kitchen. She was not here to fall into anything. She was here to protect her sister and expose a woman who had already ruined one life, Hope's own, and was clearly building toward ruining another. The next test came faster than she expected. Victoria, perhaps sensing something different in Hannah's manner, began setting small traps. She asked Hope pointed questions about things Hannah should have known, a doctor's appointment from the previous month, a family friend's name, clearly checking if her memory lined up. Hope answered as carefully as she could, drawing on details Hannah had told her over rushed phone calls each night, her heart hammering every single time. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, disaster nearly struck. Hannah's real physical therapist called the house phone to confirm a follow-up appointment, and Priya, not realizing the sensitivity, mentioned it in front of Victoria. "Strange," Victoria said afterward, watching Hope with narrowed eyes. "You don't walk like someone still in physical therapy, Hannah." "Good days and bad days," Hope said, keeping her voice even despite the ice sliding down her spine. Victoria said nothing more. But she didn't look away for a long moment, and Hope understood, with a sinking certainty, that the woman who had once destroyed her entire life in Atlanta was starting to suspect that something about Hannah wasn't adding up at all. She thought she could survive the storm quietly. Then Victoria decided to make her suffer in front of everyone. The Whitfield engagement gala arrived like a held breath finally releasing. 200 guests, string lights strung through the garden oaks, a live orchestra on the south lawn. The biggest event the family had thrown in a decade, and the entire household staff, Hope included, had been preparing for it for a week straight. Hope had hoped to stay invisible that night. She should have known better. Midway through the evening, while circulating with a tray of champagne, Hope felt a hand close around her wrist. Victoria, dressed in deep navy silk, smiled a smile that didn't reach her eyes and steered her toward a cluster of important-looking guests. "Everyone, this is Hannah," Victoria announced sweetly. "She's been with the family for years." "Hannah, dear, why don't you tell everyone about that little accident of yours? I always find it so charming, the way the help manages to keep working through absolutely anything." Laughter rippled, uncomfortable and polite, through the small crowd. Hope felt her face burn, but she kept her expression calm, murmuring something about being grateful for such a generous family, and began to step away. Victoria wasn't finished. "Oh, and Hannah, be a dear and refill the Chardonnay from that tray. Carefully, this time," she added, just as she tipped her own glass sideways, spilling deep red wine across the front of Hope's apron in front of a dozen watching guests. The crowd gasped softly. Hope stood frozen for half a second, humiliation and fury rising in her chest in equal measure, before she simply said, "Of course, and walked calmly toward the kitchen, refusing to give Victoria the reaction she was clearly fishing for. She didn't see Nathaniel watching the entire exchange from across the lawn, his jaw tight, his eyes dark with something that looked a great deal like anger, not at Hope, but at his own fiancée. He found her 20 minutes later in the small pantry off the kitchen, changing into a spare apron, her hands still shaking slightly with suppressed emotion. "That shouldn't have happened," he said quietly from the doorway. "I'm sorry." "It's not your fault," Hope said, surprised by the sincerity in his voice. "It's my house. It's my fiancé. It's my fault whether I like it or not." He hesitated, then added, "You didn't deserve that. Nobody does." For a moment, neither of them said anything, the noise of the gala drifting faintly through the walls. Then Nathaniel said, almost to himself, "I don't know when Victoria became this person. Or if she always was and I just didn't want to see it." Hope wanted, badly, to tell him everything right then, about Atlanta, about Daniel, about the prenup conversation she'd overheard, about the woman standing in his garden who had already destroyed one life just like this. But it wasn't the moment, not with 200 guests still outside and no proof solid enough to survive Victoria's inevitable denial. She didn't get the chance to decide when the moment would be right. 10 minutes later, as Hope carried a fresh tray back toward the garden, Victoria intercepted her in the dim hallway, all traces of the sweet public smile gone from her face. "You think I don't notice things?" Victoria said, low and venomous. "The way you carry yourself now. The way you look at Nathaniel. The questions you almost got wrong this week." She stepped closer, eyes glittering with something cold and satisfied. "I made a phone call this afternoon, Hannah. Or should I say, Hope?" The tray nearly slipped from Hope's hands. "I know exactly who you are, Hope Carter," Victoria said softly, smiling now, savoring the moment. "And I know exactly what happened in Atlanta. Which means you, more than anyone in this house, know precisely what I'm capable of when someone gets in my way." She turned and walked back toward the party, leaving Hope standing alone in the hallway, heart pounding, the last of her cover blown wide open. She thought the worst had already happened. She had no idea Victoria was only just getting started. Hope barely slept that night, replaying Victoria's words over and over. "I know exactly who you are." It wasn't a threat anymore, it was a declaration of war, and Hope understood that Victoria wouldn't simply expose the twin switch quietly. She would use it, weaponize it, in whatever way caused the most damage. The blow came 3 days later. Hope was summoned to the main study, where Robert Whitfield, Nathaniel's father, a stern, silver-haired man who rarely interacted with staff directly, stood beside Victoria, his expression thunderous. On the desk between them sat a small velvet box. "This belonged to my late wife's mother," Robert said coldly. "It went missing from Victoria's room 2 days ago. It was found this morning in the staff quarters. In your room, Hannah." Hope's stomach dropped. "Sir, I would never." "Save it," Robert snapped. "I don't tolerate theft in this house. Pack your things." Hope's mind raced, panic and fury colliding. She hadn't touched any jewelry, had barely been in the family's private wing without an assigned task. Someone had planted it, and there was only one person in that house with the motive, the access, and the cruelty to do it. She looked at Victoria, who stood slightly behind Robert's shoulder, her expression a perfect, practiced mask of concern, betrayed only by the faintest curl at the corner of her mouth. Hope understood instantly. This wasn't only about exposing the identity switch. This was about destroying Hannah's actual reputation. The real Hannah, who had done nothing wrong and would come back from her recovery to find her name permanently attached to a theft accusation, unable to find work anywhere in Charleston again. "I didn't take anything," Hope said, forcing her voice steady despite the fear rising in her chest. "Someone put that there. I want it investigated properly before I lose 4 years of my sister's, of my, employment over something I didn't do." Robert's eyes narrowed. "Your sister." The words hung in the air, and Hope realized, too late, that in her panic she'd nearly confirmed the very secret Victoria wanted exposed. Nathaniel, who had been silent in the corner of the room until now, stepped forward. "Dad, wait. Let's not do anything hasty. I'd like a full accounting of the last 48 hours before we make accusations that could ruin someone's life." "Nathaniel," Victoria said sharply, "surely you're not taking the maid's word over solid evidence found in her own room." "I'm taking my own judgment over convenient timing," Nathaniel said quietly, and for the first time, Hope saw real steel behind his usually gentle demeanor. "That necklace has been in this house for 30 years without incident. It disappears 3 days after a very public, very humiliating scene at our own engagement party, and turns up somewhere designed to end someone's career fast and quiet. I want the security footage from the East Wing pulled before anyone packs anything." Victoria's composure flickered, just for a fraction of a second, but Hope saw it. Robert, reluctantly, agreed to wait for the footage. The room emptied out tense and unresolved, and Hope was escorted back to the staff quarters under a cloud of suspicion, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and something else. A small, stubborn flicker of hope that maybe, finally, the truth had a chance to surface. That night, Hope called her sister, her voice shaking as she explained everything. The accusation, Victoria's threat, the very real danger that Hannah's name, her actual name, might be destroyed over a crime neither of them had committed. Hannah, propped up in bed with her foot still healing, was quiet for a long moment. "You have to tell him everything," Hannah finally said. "All of it. The switch, Atlanta, everything. Better he hears it from you than finishes hearing it from her." Hope closed her eyes, exhausted and afraid. "And if it destroys everything? Your job? Mom's treatment? All of it?" "Then we survive that too," Hannah said softly. "The way we always have. But Hope, I'd rather lose the job telling the truth than keep it by letting that woman win." The security footage was supposed to end her career. Instead, it exposed something no one in that house expected. The footage came back the next afternoon, and Nathaniel insisted on reviewing it personally, alongside his father and, at Victoria's insistence, Victoria herself, in the privacy of the study. It showed, with quiet, damning clarity, Victoria entering the staff quarters hallway late the previous night, glancing around before slipping into Hannah's small room for less than 90 seconds, and leaving again with nothing visibly in her hands, but the timestamp lined up exactly with when the necklace must have been placed. Robert Whitfield stared at the screen in silence for a long moment, his face going through several colors before settling on a controlled, furious calm. "Explain this," he said flatly to Victoria. "I was checking on the room, making sure everything was in order after the accusation of," Victoria began. "The necklace went missing before the accusation was even made public," Nathaniel cut in quietly. "You knew it was missing before anyone reported it missing, Victoria. Because you're the one who took it." The room went silent. Victoria's carefully composed mask cracked fully for the first time, fury and panic flashing across her face before she caught herself. It was in that charged silence that Hope, who had been summoned to confirm details of the room's layout, made her decision. She had come too far, and too much was at risk, To let half-truths keep protecting a woman who had already ruined one life and was clearly circling toward ruining another. "There's something else you all need to know," Hope said quietly, and every eye in the room turned to her. "My name isn't Hannah. I'm her twin sister, Hope. Hannah broke her ankle 11 days before the gala and asked me to cover for her so she wouldn't lose her job, because our mother needs heart surgery and we couldn't afford to lose 2 weeks' pay. I never meant to deceive anyone beyond that. But somewhere in this house, in this arrangement, I found out things I didn't expect to find." Robert's expression shifted from anger to stunned disbelief. Nathaniel simply watched her, quiet and unreadable, as she continued. 5 years ago, in Atlanta, I was engaged to a man named Daniel Reyes. I had a career I loved, an events management job at a hotel. A woman came into that hotel calling herself Vicky. Within 2 months, I'd been falsely accused of stealing money I never touched, fired, blacklisted, and my fiancé had left me for her. Hope looked directly at Victoria now, her voice steady despite the tremor beneath it. "That woman is standing in this room right now. And 2 nights ago, I overheard her on the phone, discussing how to quietly alter a prenuptial agreement before this wedding, and admitting, in her own words, that she's done this exact thing to someone before and doesn't intend to lose this time." The silence that followed was heavier than anything Hope had ever experienced. Victoria let out a short, humorless laugh, though her hands were visibly trembling now. "This is absurd. A grieving maid making up stories to save her own job." "The footage," Nathaniel said quietly, cutting her off, "already shows you planting evidence to have an innocent woman fired, Victoria. I think we're well past the point of me believing anything you say without proof." He turned to his father. "Pull the financial records. All of them. Now." Robert, pale but resolute, nodded and left the room to make the call. Victoria turned toward Hope, eyes blazing with fury and something close to fear. "You have no idea what you've just done," she hissed. "I know exactly what I've done," Hope said quietly. "I told the truth. Something you've never been very good at." She had just told the truth that could end everything. She had no idea it was about to save it instead. Nathaniel asked to speak with Hope alone that evening, out on the same back terrace where she had once seen him standing lonely against the dark river. He stood with his hands in his pockets, staring out at the water for a long moment before turning to face her. "I need to understand something," he said quietly. "Everything you told my father, is all of it true?" "Every word," Hope said. "I never meant to lie to you specifically. I meant to fill in for 2 weeks, keep my head down, and disappear. I didn't expect to find out the woman you were about to marry was the same woman who destroyed my entire life 5 years ago. And I didn't expect," she hesitated, then made herself finish honestly, "I didn't expect to start caring what happened to you in the middle of all of it." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment, studying her face, the face he had spoken to for 2 weeks, believing it belonged to someone named Hannah, never realizing the woman behind it carried an entirely different history, an entirely different weight. "I should probably be furious," he finally said. "Deceived, humiliated, made a fool of in my own house. But honestly, Hope," he said her real name carefully, testing its shape, "the version of you I got to know these past 2 weeks is the most honest, clear-eyed person who's spoken to me in years. Including, apparently, my own fiancé." "I understand if you need time," Hope said quietly. "This is a lot, all at once." "It is," he agreed. "But some things become clear faster than you'd expect, once you finally see them without the fog someone's been feeding you." He looked at her steadily. "I felt more like myself talking to you in a kitchen doorway than I have in 4 years of gala dinners with Victoria. That's not something I can unknow now." Meanwhile, inside the house, Robert Whitfield's financial team had spent the evening tearing through records with the urgency of men uncovering a fire before it spread. What they found was worse than anyone anticipated. Victoria had, over the 18 months of her engagement to Nathaniel, quietly redirected funds from a smaller family trust into an account under a name that traced back, eventually, to a shell company she controlled. She had also, the record showed, engaged a lawyer weeks earlier to draft prenuptial language that would grant her a significant stake in Whitfield Hotels regardless of how the marriage ended. Language Nathaniel had never been shown. It was, in Robert's own furious words, financial theft wearing a wedding dress. Confronted with the evidence that night, Victoria's calm finally shattered completely. She raged, she denied, she threatened legal retaliation. She accused Hope of fabricating the entire Atlanta story out of jealousy. But the footage, the financial trail, and Priya, Victoria's own long-suffering assistant, who finally came forward with records of edited documents she'd been forced to help produce, left no room left for denial. By midnight, Robert Whitfield had called his lawyers. By 1 a.m, the engagement was formally, irreversibly over. Victoria was given until morning to pack and leave the estate. She did not go quietly. She thought exposing the truth would ruin her. Instead, it was the moment everything finally fell into place. Victoria's last act inside the Whitfield estate was, true to her nature, an attempt to burn everything down on her way out. She called a reporter from a Charleston society blog before dawn, feeding a version of the story designed to cause maximum damage. That the wealthy Whitfield family had employed a maid who secretly swapped identities with her twin sister to infiltrate the household, and had somehow seduced the family's own son in the process. It was a cruel, twisted version of events, aimed less at protecting herself than at making sure Hope's reputation, and by extension, Hannah's, burned along with hers. By the time the story broke online that morning, the household staff were already whispering, and Hope, exhausted and heartbroken, feared the worst, that no matter what Victoria had done, the scandal of a maid's deception would be the version of events that stuck. She was wrong. Nathaniel Whitfield addressed it himself, publicly, later that same day, standing on the front steps of the estate before the small cluster of press that had gathered at the gates. There was a story published this morning containing some truth and a great deal of manipulation, he said calmly, his voice carrying clearly across the driveway. Yes, a woman named Hope Carter covered for her injured twin sister for 2 weeks, out of love for her family and a need to keep food on their table and their mother's medical care funded. That is not a scandal. That is exactly the kind of quiet sacrifice most wealthy families in this town could stand to understand a little better. He paused, his jaw tight. What is a scandal is that my former fiancée spent 18 months quietly siphoning money from my family's trust and drafting legal documents behind my back, and when she was caught, her response was to try to destroy the reputation of 2 working women who did nothing wrong. That story is the one worth telling. The crowd of reporters went still, several visibly recalibrating the article they'd already half-written in their heads. Inside the house, Hannah, finally out of her walking boot and able to travel, arrived that same afternoon, having driven straight from her mother's house the moment Hope called her in tears with the whole unbelievable story. The twins stood together in the estate's grand foyer for the first time in years, both crying, both laughing through it, the weight of 2 weeks of secrecy finally lifting all at once. Robert Whitfield, gruff but not unkind at heart, found them there and did something none of the staff had ever seen him do. He apologized. To both of them. For nearly firing Hannah over an accusation that was never hers to answer for, and for the family's blindness to what Victoria had truly been. Your sister, he said to Hannah, gesturing at Hope, showed more integrity in 2 weeks than my son's fiancée managed in a year and a half. That's not something this family will forget. That evening, as the sun set gold over the Ashley River, Nathaniel found Hope on the same terrace where they'd spoken the night before, and this time, he didn't hesitate. I know this is fast, he said. I know the timing is complicated, and messy, and probably exactly the kind of thing gossip columns love. But I'd like the chance to know you, really you, Hope, not a version filling in for someone else, without a countdown clock on it this time. Hope looked at him, at the man who had chosen truth over comfort, who had stood in front of cameras and defended 2 women society would have happily thrown away, and for the first time in 5 years, she let herself hope for something good without immediately bracing for it to be taken away. I'd like that too, she said. Some stories end where they started. This one ended somewhere neither sister ever imagined possible. Linda Carter's heart surgery took place 6 weeks later, fully funded, quietly, without fanfare or press, exactly the way Nathaniel insisted it be handled by the Whitfield family. Hannah sat beside her mother's hospital bed holding her hand as she came out of anesthesia, and for the first time in 2 years, the doctors used the word recovery instead of management. Hannah returned to her job at the Whitfield estate a month later, this time not as a secret or a stand-in, but as herself, promoted to household manager at Ruth's quiet insistence and the family's full support. She often joked that it was the strangest job promotion in Charleston history, earned by way of her twin sister's disguise. Victoria Sterling's name became a quiet local scandal, then eventually faded from Charleston society altogether, her attempt at one final story never taking root the way she'd hoped. What remained, instead, was the far better story. 2 sisters, raised without much, who chose honesty in each other over every easy shortcut that might have been available to them. Hope stayed in Charleston. She and Nathaniel took things slowly, deliberately, both of them wary of repeating old mistakes, both of them determined to build something real instead of something convenient. A year later, in a small garden ceremony far quieter than the gala that had first brought Hope into that house, Nathaniel Whitfield married Hope Carter, with Hannah standing beside her sister as maid of honor, their mother seated in the front row, healthy enough to stand and dance by the end of the night. If there's one thing this story leaves behind, it's this: the people who truly love you were never impressed by what you owned or how polished you looked at a party. They were paying attention to how you treated the people the world taught you to overlook. Hannah and Hope never had money, or status, or an easy path. What they had was each other, and the courage to tell the truth even when a lie would have been safer. That's usually where the real strength in any family is hiding, not in what looks impressive from the outside, but in what people are willing to sacrifice quietly for the ones they love when nobody else is watching. If this story moved you tonight, do me a favor, hit that like button, it genuinely helps this channel more than you know. Subscribe if you want more stories just like this one, and if someone in your life could use a reminder that honesty and love always find their way to the people who deserve them, share this with them. Thank you for staying until the very end. I'll see you in the next story.